The most difficult thing to position in a window is text. Now that's because fonts are different and are drawn by different people. But fortunately, there's a standard set of measurements that you can use to figure out how big a font is and where you want to put it. But to do this, you have to know the names of the measurements and just how these measurements are taken. Every letter sits on the baseline. All letters stick above it, some higher than others, and some letters stick below it. But when you're placing text on the screen, you do that by positioning the baseline. You actually position the point of the baseline directly in front of the first letter of the string, this point right here. Now the value of the accent is the number of pixels that the tallest letter in the font extends above the baseline. If you leave enough room above the baseline to display the accent, all the letters of the font will display. The same thing goes for the descent. Not all letters have descenders, but those that do will go no further down than the value of the descent defined for that font. The overall height of a font is defined as the sum of the descent and the ascent plus the height of something called the leading. The leading is an open space below a font. It gets this name from the fact that a thin strip of lead was placed between lines of text when type was inserted by hand. Anyway, the overall height of a font includes the leading, and you can add the height value to the baseline of a line of text to determine the position of the next line of text, that is, the one below it. But some measurements vary depending on the string of characters being displayed. Some characters are wider than others. Notice that the letter M is much wider than the letter I. By the way, that's why a long dash is known as an M dash and a shorter one is known as an N dash. The dashes were originally the same widths as the letters. Now the width of things in a font can be different for every letter. What this means is the width of an overall string of characters can only be calculated for the actual string being displayed. There's no way to figure the width of a certain number of characters, the length of a string, by the number of characters in it. This makes some things a little clumsy. For example, you can't build a window to hold a specific number of characters until you know what the characters are. That's why when you fill out a graphic form, you always have room left, or the thing has to scroll over to make room for you. One font object is included inside the graphics object that's passed to your paint method. You can use this default object, or you can replace it with a font of your own. To show you how font measurements are extracted from this font, this program prints the measurements of the default font object. Now the graphics object itself contains the default font object, and it knows the characteristics of the window to be used for display, so it is able to use this information to calculate and construct a font metrics object and return it to your program. It contains all the constant measurements. It actually contains more information than this program shows, but this is all we're going to be using in this course. Now this is a declaration of the X and Y positions of the first line. Remember, this point will be at the beginning of the string displayed and on the baseline. And this line of code actually draws the accent value on the window using the X and Y positions we've just calculated. To draw the next line of text so it doesn't just go right over the top of the first line, it is necessary to move the position down the screen by adding to Y, the vertical position. We use the font height for the adding. This moves the position of the baseline down the screen by the sum of the ascent, the descent, and the leading. And this distance is just right for displaying lines of text in this font. The same technique is used for drawing the other lines of text, showing the descent, the leading, the height, and the total width of one particular string. These are the fundamental values. These values can be used to place text where you want it, top, bottom, left, right, center, whatever. As I said, there are some other values available, and they can be useful in some special circumstances, but these shown here are probably the only ones you will ever need. We'll be positioning some text in the next lesson.